start again, and I welcome everybody to our roundtable at the Berlin Climate Security Conference, the third one, the second one virtually. Hopefully next year we can see again in person. And this is the session on climate security partnerships for peace, how the United Nations, the European Union, the African Union could align their efforts and missions. And we would love to look at the case of Somalia today. And my name is Tobias Pietz. I'm the deputy head of the analysis division here at the Center for International Peace Operations in Berlin. And as I said, I welcome you very much. And I'm especially thankful that I have a fantastic co-facilitator, my dear colleague, Sharon Wiharta. She's a senior policy advisor at the Challenges Forum International Secretariat in Stockholm and a long-term partner in crime. And she has extensive also mission experience at MINUSMA in Mali, for example. And so I hand over to Sharon, who will introduce our great team today at our roundtable. Sharon, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Tobias. Pleasure to be doing this with you. Welcome, everyone. We're very excited to have a very esteemed panel of discussants. I'd like to introduce Ilwat Elman. She's the Chief Operating Officer at the Elman Peace Center, which you all know, among other things, the center is dedicated to cultivating leadership among women and youth to be decision makers in political processes, and Elman's also advisor to the UN Peacebuilding Fund. We're very pleased to have Maria Concepcion Jimenez Serrano, also known as Conchi, with us. She's the project manager at the EU Capacity Building Mission in Somalia, and you've been the focal point on environmental issues in the mission. And we have Christoph Hodder, who is the UN's first climate security and environmental advisor to UNSOM, and also a member of the Climate Security Expert Network. So welcome. And then also not to forget Lucas Röttinger, who is at Adelphi, the mastermind, I suppose, behind this entire Berlin Climate Security Conference. So welcome, everybody. Over to you, Tobias.
Thanks, Sharon. So why is it important to actually speak about partnerships on climate and environmental security between peace operations, but also between peace operations and local governments and civil society organizations, NGOs in theater? I think when it comes to the cooperation between peace operations, we have seen now for 2 decades that there has been a growth of actual parallel deployment of peace operations, whether it's from the United Nations, the African Union, or the European Union. And unfortunately, we've seen that this kind of parallel deployment comes with a lot of challenges in cooperation. And too often these missions have been struggling also in finding a way to working in a complementary way. So I think not only on this issue, but in general, it's always good to have a complementary and efficient partnership between these international organizations. And of course, then also with the field, with local governments, with host governments, with partners on the ground, especially civil society organizations. And I think when we look at the African continent, especially, we've seen that United Nations, African Union, and the EU are deploying most of their personnel, most of their missions at the moment to the African continent. And each and every theater, each and every country they are deploying to is heavily impacted by climate change and the effects of climate change. So this has consequences, of course, in the implementation of mandates, but it also has consequences in just the daily running of missions and operations, and also the daily running of peace-building activities, of everything we do in the field together or each and every one of our organizations. And I think especially the United Nations has really not only noticed this, but has reacted during the last 5 to 10 years to that challenge in various ways. And let me just highlight here the climate security mechanism, which has been one of the most influential instruments during the last 2 years, still in setup, but I think it will be the one that is key in really mainstreaming this issue also when it comes to operational planning and risk analysis, not only for the UN, but maybe even for partners such as the European Union and the African Union. And I think also the European Union and the new senior leadership of the African Union have really realized the importance of the issue and are now looking into how to strengthen their responses in a potential way to that challenge. So today we want to talk about what is actually happening already, because I think we can say there is already something happening. But most importantly, we really want to talk about the potential, what else we can do, how this topic might be also a good catalyst for new forms of cooperation, for new forms of partnerships. And I think this is really what this very short, but hopefully very focused session is about. And of course, as we are talking also about civil society, Sharon said that already, we're really happy to have Ilvat with us today, because Ilvat, we are grateful because you just briefed actually the UN Security Council on these issues. And so I would love to start with you, Ilvat, with the first round, with the first topic that we would like to dive into. And this is really, what are actually the most pressing issues around climate change in Somalia today? And how does that actually affect your work as a peace builder?
Well, thank you very much, Tobias, for organizing this conversation, for having me here, and to Sharon as well from the Challenges Forum. There are many issues in Somalia. Somalia is undergoing several adverse climate changes. Changes in rainfall, rising temperature, increasing extreme weather events, and it is beset by high levels of environmental degradation that is causing extensive loss of forest and agricultural area. And we have a poor performing agricultural sector as a result of low soil quality, low rates of fertilizer use, and poor irrigation practices. We've seen floods and droughts exacerbate conflict and displacement. Just a few weeks ago, we're in the village of Hananbure, where two tribes were in an armed conflict due to water scarcity. Qalqala is another village where we have seen similar such tribal conflicts on numerous occasions because of water and food scarcity. And this is the norm across the country when the rainfall is erratic between seasons, and in a population that is heavily armed, this becomes increasingly more challenging. Not only Somalia, but there's an urgent need to stem the global flow of weapons, especially small arms in poorer countries whose environmental resources are already under stress. Recently, the UN and other international actors have been labeling a group of farmers and herders in Somalia called the Mawi Slay as an armed militia, but Somali people recognize them to be farmers and herders who are now armed to the teeth to protect their land and livestock from each other and other threats. Al-Shabaab is known very well for stealing livestock for their own sustenance. Community members and families are forced to either give financial contribution to Al-Shabaab in the areas of the control. If they can't do that, they have to give their livestock, which is also, of course, currency. And if they can't do that, they have to give a son to be recruited. Often this leads to communities becoming depleted of all of their resources and having to move for their own survival. And even then they are met with challenges of becoming displaced. In summary, what we see in Somalia is conflict over environmental resources and conflict causing environmental impacts. The influence of climate and environmental issues are deeply embedded within the factors that shape the prospects of security and insecurity in Somalia. So maybe I'll just leave it at that for now, so we can also hear from the other respondents.
Thank you very much, Ilvat. That also already raises a lot of different issues, and very much shows how pressing climate change and environmental issues are in Somalia today. Chris, you've been the environmental and climate security advisor for almost 1.5 years now, I think, at UNSOM Somalia. I mean, from the UN perspective, what is your assessment on the situation on the ground, and what is like the most pressing needs or when it comes to climate change in Somalia?
Yeah, thanks, Tobias. And I'd just like to reiterate what Ilva was saying. I think some of the biggest issues we're seeing recurrent flooding now due to climate change. So in the last 5 years, we've seen 9 severe breakages of the rivers compared to 1 over the last 10 years. So the severe breakage rising is happening constantly, that regular flooding is happening, and then on top of that we've got regular droughts as well. So the drought flooding cycle is getting worse and worse and worse, and of course, as Ilva was saying, that's contributing to displacement. That displacement is contributing to also deforestation, because a lot of 90% of Somalis need charcoal for their daily energy needs, so they're chopping down trees, and a lot of Somalis don't want to do it, but there's no other alternatives. So how do we, that chopping down of trees, that displacement, leading to soil erosion, leading to contributing to also more and more displacement, and exacerbating the conflict as well, because then that competition over the natural resources is also increasing. So we're seeing conflict over grazing lands and over water, and we can see that increasing over the years. So yeah, they're the main things. Over.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that already paints a very severe picture when we look at everything related also to the land. But Conchi, I know that EUCAP Somalia and together with Atalanta, you're focusing also a lot on maritime issues. Maybe you want to add what some of the maritime challenges are when it comes to climate change and environmental security at the moment, and how EUCAP Somalia sees that. Conchi?
Well, not only regarding to maritime, but also what we have seen is that the conflict clashes between communities are recurrent, so they are linked to certain times of the year. So these could be indirectly linked to climate change, and this is quite relevant because Somalia now lacks adequate enforcement of a legal framework and plan for implementing a kind of a disaster support. And also this climate change is linked to exacerbating already difference between societies, and especially gender focus. So yeah, also the extreme weather impacts the mandate, the implementation of the mandate due to climate, due to high temperatures. So it difficults also the implementation of the mandate.
So we can see that, you know, not only the population in Somalia is really struggling with the situation, but also the international organizations. And thanks for that first assessment on the overall situation in Somalia. And with that, I would like to hand over to Sharon, as we would like to look more into the practical examples of the cooperation between the three of you, whether or not between the missions or also with civil society. So Sharon, over to you.
Thanks, Tobias. Maybe Chris, you can start us off on outlining some of the emerging good practices or examples of partnerships that the UN has embarked on with the government as well as the communities in Somalia, and how to support their efforts to be more climate resilient.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that you know, we would be one of the first to say there's a lot more to do, and I think that, you know, ILWAD will also focus on that there needs to be much more a link between the UN and you know, government and local communities, and sometimes I guess the UN maybe doesn't go far enough to support things, but I think that, you know, we are trying as everybody, and I think that there are some good practices. So for example, I think that we are partnering, for example, with the EU on having a joint environmental committee between the AU, the UN, and we're bringing in partners such as the EU on things like how can we overall reduce our footprint. So we're looking at, for example, bringing in the private sector, look at mini grids to look at how can we do that. We're also looking at forward operating bases of AU, you know, AU forces, to look at how we could look at you know, solar panel or the environmental impact of some of those forward operating bases. And as Elwood saying, there's a, you know, there is a lot of issues there around the sort of work that forces are doing, and as well supporting the Somali National Army on you know, things like water wells. And we know that militant groups, Al-Shabaab, they do poison or they bomb water wells as a control mechanism. And we know, we've seen that also in the riverbanks, that they are in Belatwain and areas like that, where they are you know, breaking riverbanks as part of a control system with communities. And so how do we work with AU forces? How do we work with SNA so Somali National Army to focus on you know, the issues of climate change and trying to look at also predicting and building in thinking around climate change, because there's also things around military planning, there's also those sort of things. So that's sort of one example. And I think with communities, we are working closely with communities on so there's a program on charcoal that was originally based on focused on the export of charcoal. It was a huge export business, but luckily due to government controls and UN sanctions, that we've managed to stop a lot of that export. However, production has continued, as I was saying. So a lot of that deforestation and charcoal use. So what we're trying to do is work with local communities around setting up and supporting nurseries, looking at alternatives to charcoals. And there's quite a lot of civil society organizations, grassroots organizations that are working really hard on. So there's a Dika Foundation in Puntland, there's a Candlelight in Somaliland, and there's like the Elwood Foundation. They do a lot of work as well. So there's a lot of work to be done. A lot of great examples, but there's more to be done.
Great, thanks very much. And what I think maybe I'll just picking up on Chris's point, and you also made this in your remarks to the Security Council, where you really advocated for bottom-up approach to these issues. I wondered if you could perhaps expand on or shed light on some of the examples of such bottom-up approaches, these partnerships between grassroots organizations and or with local government leaders. Thanks.
I mean, absolutely. My appeal to the Security Council, if you will, was really from, I think, a level of both frustration and necessity as well too, for peace builders that are working in environments that are degrading, and there's a lot of climate challenges, and it's posing risks to our peace building efforts. And we see that there's a need for a thematic resolution around this very niche and new arena of climate and security to provide more guidance for peace building practitioners, for civil society organizations that are in these environments that don't necessarily have the support or perhaps the academic background. I think that there's been a wealth of knowledge and research done around the impacts of climate change and environmental degradation on communities like ours in Somalia, but very little operationally on equipping, upskilling individuals that are in these communities to contribute to more resiliency and integrate climate resiliency into our programming. What I also see is that in Somalia is that we need to account for and navigate the complex relationships that exist between the state and the non-state actors, and including civil society organizations as well. Every federal member state has a Ministry of Environment in Somalia. But from the outside looking in, there appears to be a lot of ambiguity in these government positions and functions. And I think that the UN, the EU, and the AU are all well placed to support in cultivating stronger partnerships between the regional and state governments and with local and civil society, as well as the private sector. This includes helping the Somali government to propose and enact effective policies, developing suitable programs that take up much of this theoretical conversation into practical implemented programs and institutions, mobilizing resources at the communal, state, and regional levels. Again, there is a lot of steps that are being taken in this space right now. Chris's position, being appointed as a climate security advisor, is still very novel. I think there needs to be more globally as well too, but there's opportunities for cooperation around supporting non-traditional climate and development actors to also navigate this space. And in the absence of that support to peacebuilding practitioners like myself and our institution, we forged partnership with external actors. So we recently collaborated with the Northwestern University in Chicago that has created a whole class essentially around our work, our peacebuilding work, and our prevention of violent extremism work in Somalia, and helped us to develop tools that can help us better program in this sector as well too. And we developed a climate change adaptation checklist. And this has helped us to understand if we are proactively building climate adaptability into our programming to aid in the peacebuilding process. This forward-looking approach has really helped us build community resilience and forced us to build assets that will help communities deal with current and future climate impacts, thus leaving communities less vulnerable to climate impacts as well. And I think that this is the direction that I see cooperation between UN, EU, AU, and civil society, not only providing capacity, but also the resources to not reinvent our interventions, but to improve them, to also tick the environmental box and actually implement it so that it contributes to sustainable peacebuilding efforts.
Thanks. That's a really important point, bringing it more concrete, so to say. Maria, I want to bring you into the conversation for this initial round. Where do you see the EU's role together with the UN and perhaps with the AU in terms of some of a good example of partnership?
Well, Somalia has just ratified the annexes of MARPOL, and it's also have previously ratified Annex 1 and 2 and SOLAS. So those are towards the supporting a maritime crime investigation. And so UN and EU, and in fact, they are already working with the Maritime Administration, recently created, towards capacity building in detecting and giving a coordinated response to maritime crime. So UNSON and UECAP are already doing capacity building for the government institutions, and it's planned also, we are also donating equipment. And also additionally, it could be, we could do something which was requested by Somali administration, is to do a mapping of the sensitive enhanced mapping, which maps some of the sensitive areas. So if there is any oil spill, or if there is any incidence of pollutions in the sea, the Somali administrations are able to give an efficient response. So this capacity building in terms of policies, implementations, and also in terms of giving a response to the crimes, environmental crimes at sea, are a future way in which we are already collaborating, and we are also planning to continue collaboration with Somalia. And in fact, there is also GIS capabilities, so simple tools that are already in place, and some of them, they are free access, which provide Earth view, which provides some mapping of live climate hazards, which could support not only to respond to crime, maritime crime, and other environmental crimes, but also could support the policy in bringing a plan towards environmental crime or environmental planning. So yeah, that's some of the contribution, and for that we are currently planning to do a matrix exercise, which will support the implementation of Annex 2 of MARPOL. So this will could be an exercise to support Somalia in also to integrate regional governance and regional organisms like a MASE program that give guidance on how to respond and how to different countries within the region coordinate to give an efficient response if there is any incidents in the ocean.
Thanks. Maybe just a quick sort of follow-up as well on, so Chris mentioned these joint environmental committees that the three primary international actors are cooperating on, I suppose, in a very practical manner. Are there other sort of systemic or structures between these three organizations, working groups, to cooperate between the UN and EU?
Well,
yeah, so I mean, there are multiple, sorry, Conchi. Yeah, there are multiple layers and multiple things, both from you know, the security side and from the development and the humanitarian side. So there is a lot of cooperation frameworks already there, and so I guess the answer there is to try to mainstream the environmental climate security issues into those already existing frameworks. And I think that those are the ones that we still need to bring a lot of focus on, and part of this joint environmental committee is to actually highlight the different focal points, and Conchi's role and my role are both still temporary, and we're trying to see how we can build those more into the systems. But I think that we one of the things that we realized, for example, this solar powered project in Baidoa that we're trying to put together, one of the issues that we're realizing is that it's not just an environmental, it's not just an environmental delivery mechanism, and we can't just do it from an engineering perspective. What we've got to do is bring together the political side as well, because there's a lot about land and land tenure, and then on top of that, there's also the community side. So actually, the whole thing is it has to be a cooperation, as Ilva was saying, from these three organizations, but we have to have civil society and government engaged, because otherwise it just doesn't work.
I'm glad you raised that last point, which brings so that I can ask Ilva on a very practical front, sort of some of the work that you've been doing with or collaborating with Chris and the mission. For instance, on some of the peace building initiatives that your center and the mission is probably collaborating on.
Well, I think everything starts from first, sharing information and being informed about what the mission is doing. And I'm constantly learning about the programs that they're piloting in different federal member states. And I think that Element Peace, we have our own interventions where we are shifting our very hard security interventions, whether it's on the preventing of violent extremism, on the rehabilitation and reintegration of young people, whether it's on reconciliation and transitional justice. We're seeing in the areas that we're working in newly recovered territories as well too, that are affected by environmental issues and climate change. So, and I think that where we are positioned as an organization is very similar from many other institutes in Somalia as well too, where they are forced to work on climate change issues, because our peace building measures will not be sustainable, where we will not be able to reintegrate individuals effectively back into communities that are impacted by environmental degradation. And therefore, it's great that we now have a dedicated focus on climate and security under Christopher's portfolio. And there's a lot more that we can do to deepen these corporations. And I think it's key for all of us to work together across the different issues. We are seeing in Somalia now, environment and developmental campaigners starting to work together on issues such as climate change, but more alliances are needed between peace campaigners and environment and development groups, and not making this another siloed engagement effort. There needs to be deepened cooperation around these issues, also because of the impact that they'll have on existing efforts to address gender-based violence, for example, to support vulnerable populations, and by supporting the development of policies as well too with the government to promote alternative agriculture and the green economy. There are many opportunities between different actors that are gathered here today to actually impact Somali society at large. And I think that what we are seeing in Somalia right now is really quite novel, not only on the continent, but globally as well too, to really have this tripartite cooperation between the UN, the AU, but also civil society.
Fantastic. I'm just looking at the time, Dan. Perhaps should we go on to a more forward-looking agenda, Tobias?
Thank you very much, Sharon. And actually, what Ilva just said was very much forward-looking. So I think that's perfect to link to the last block of our roundtable. And I mean, Chris, you've not only talked to us today about what is already happening. You've also written some interesting papers on that, and there's a lot of things going on. But where do you see now the most concrete potential, in Somalia to actually move things forward? Because we all know, there are so many different things on the agenda of UN peace operations. But where's the potential in this area to actually move things forward with partners? And because we are lacking a little bit the African Union perspective, and this is just by coincidence, we haven't been able to get somebody else on board, but maybe also to bring in the African Union or AMISOM. Is there potential also for AMISOM and the African Union in this overall partnership for Somalia?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that there's, and we do We do work with Amazon, like I was saying before, and I think that there's a much greater role they can say. But I also think, you know, I noticed there are colleagues in the participants that are from IGAD, and actually I think that IGAD plays a really important role here as well in terms of some of the climate data, the climate information, and I think that they would, you know, bringing them on board is actually also very key. But I think that, you know, the opportunities here are, as Ilwad was saying, to have this sort of really strong, inclusive, collaborative, multilateral approach. And I think that we cannot do this siloed, and we need to do it much more, you know, together. And so, you know, these sort of forward-looking ideas about bringing, you know, organizations like the Ilwad Foundation to work on adaptation at that local level. And I really do think we've got to focus much more on supporting indigenous knowledge and supporting, you know, women at that local level who bear most of the brunt of climate change, and really supporting those local community-led adaptation approaches, but bringing in the aspect of you know, environmental mediation, looking at how can we bring you know, new technologies, but also development and humanitarians together to think around, okay, we were to rewild and replant and tree certain areas, and also can we use nature-based solutions through a match of community-based approaches and community knowledge, but also bringing in, you know, new technologies, different thinkings, different plannings, and trying to match those at those community levels. And then I think finally to bring those UN government and systems to really support the growth of that, I think is absolutely key. So this is why I really do think that collaboration, focusing on a sort of community-led adaptation, bringing that, I mean, one of the things we haven't mentioned here is the equity side, and I do think we've got to think around equity as a really important part of this, because we can't really adapt and focus on community resilience building unless we bring that equity angle as well. So I think it's got to be an inclusive approach where we really try to coordinate well at that local level.
Thanks, Chris. Just a quick question, because I'm really curious, and this is a little bit unrelated, but I mean, you're the first climate security advisor in a UN peace operation. Internally, is that working? Are there a lot of blocks? Is there a lot of support? I mean, if you're the first one, it's also, you know, that maybe some people say like, oh, wait, I mean, we have so much in our mandate already. This is, you know, just something else. I mean, how have you been successful in actually selling the point that this could be also, you know, something for the mission as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, it's been fairly easy to sell it. I think actually most people in the UN recognize the impacts of climate change. I think most people in the AU and the EU are definitely changing behaviors. I think, you know, there are certain aspects, specifically in some of the more harder security lines, that have found it a bit difficult. So, you know, for example, changing views around solar panels and the fact that we can't have anything overhead with rockets and mortars and stuff like that, but trying to figure out, like, you know, trying to think of things slightly different. I think there's actually definitely a lot of appetite, interest, realization. I think that there's so yeah, I've actually found my work has really spread very, very quickly, and I've found some really great allies across you know, across the whole spectrum. So it's been really, really great, actually. I think the question is what to focus on and how do you bring it all together, because it's so broad and so multifaceted that it becomes very complicated. So it's really picking the specifics and trying to hit hard those specific areas. And so that's why we're really trying to focus down on certain specific areas. But yeah, no, I think it's been pretty good.
Thank you. Well, also the European Union, you know, has been slowly, but also, you know, increasing their response and looking into, you know, how they can more systematically approach these issues. And the thing is, Conchi, Oikab Somalia is really not the only EU actor in town when it comes to Somalia. And you told me that actually you're working a lot also with the EU delegation. And I was just wondering, is climate and environmental security for the EU actors now something like an instrument for a better, more comprehensive approach of the European Union on the ground? Is that working? Is there potential for the EU to actually maybe use also something as the Green Deal and all these things that are now, you know, put forward also, you know, for foreign policy by the European Union to actually support organizations and governments, such as in Somalia, such as the one that Ilvat is working at? Is there something?
Yeah, so indeed, the European Union delegation in Somalia has a strong program to implement the EU Green Deal and Paris Agreement and the SDG. So for us in UCAP specifically, we are more focused on supporting law enforcement capabilities. And this is also linked to environment. So for us, we will implement our support. We will continue supporting our counterparts in the government, in the capacity building, and also in the operational exercise with the Coast Guard, with the police, like exercise that have already taken place in the past in collaboration with UNAFOR. And for sure, as the climate change and environment policies and laws in Somalia are still in an early process, we are working in there is also a potential to work with the authorities to establish environmental laws and also in the implementation. And for that, we are, like I mentioned before, we have an exercise on mackerels, which will support the judiciary to establish, which will give formation to the Attorney General Office in implementing laws. And this could also be used to support environmental laws and the environmental crime. And additionally, also linked to CSDP missions, now there is a strong request to look at a mission footprint, not only in the military CSDP missions, but also on the civilian. So we will look at the how to look at the footprint of the mission. And in fact, Somalia is one of the first countries in signing the Paris Agreement. So this is quite relevant now. And so yeah, for that, this is the missions have the mandate to implement the mission footprint and also to look at sustainable resources and green procurement. So and also just looking at how is now in other missions how it was implemented, this environmental mandate. There are currently 2 CSDP missions that have incorporated an environment advisors, which are Central African Republic and Mali. And also they have a project on environment in EUPOL COPS in Palestine. So what they remark, it is that as environmental crime is something quite new, is that it is quite important to give our awareness session and also to incentivize law enforcement agencies towards the environmental degradation and the effect on environmental crimes. So this is also something that we plan to do. And for that, it is quite relevant to see how the different organizations, how the central government and how the different member states can collaborate towards sharing information, sharing the good practices, and also cooperating to detect and investigate environmental crime. And just something that is quite new, and I found it's quite relevant in regards to the EU regarding to environment, it is a program, the program GMES in Africa, which is a cooperation for the European Union and Africa in providing a satellite image. So this is this will use existing Copernicus program and also the Sentinel-6, which will be launched soon, and also some other satellite programs that are focused on climate, and also the new Sentinel program will map all the ocean. So this will support how to Coast Guard and police in monitoring the ocean, so improve current ship trafficking and also water quality monitoring and other environmental aspects that could serve not only to response to the climate or other environment related risk, but also for policymakers. So I think this is quite relevant because this GIS capabilities are quite new in Somalia, and they could be implemented easily with already free available information.
Thank you very much. I actually think that, you know, the EU Satellite Center is a slightly neglected or overseen actor, which is really important, not only for EU missions, but, you know, the kind of information and what they can do could be actually very helpful to other international organizations, as well as, you know, not only governments, but also civil society, especially when we're looking at, you know, extreme weather and other, you know, changes that can really hit the people on the ground in a very surprising and heavy matter. In general, I think it's great to see that, you know, the EU and the CSDP missions are more and more engaged. Of course, very much focusing on their key area, which is security sector reform. So, of course, environmental crime, these issues come very naturally to the EU, and it's good to see that other missions have already hired also environmental advisors. And you told us that actually also your mission is in the process of sending out a call for contribution to also hire an environmental advisor very soon. So I think it's good that, you know, each and every mission, whether it's EU or UN, and eventually hopefully also the African Union, will have these component points of contact where people also like ILVAT and their organizations know, you know, these are the people we can approach. But coming back to you, ILVAT, and maybe again making the point of your briefing to the UN Security Council, I think you really called upon not only United Nations but international organizations in general to actually provide support to organizations like you. You know, we're always talking to host governments, and I know that there has been also a question by a participant, you know, what's with the federal government of Somalia, with the state structure. Well, the thing is, you know, we tend to talk and cooperate with host governments and host government institutions, and you really called for, you know, stronger support for grassroots level. If you would have, like, say, like 2 or 3 very concrete demands, what would you love to see or have actually from your counterparts at OICAP Somalia, at UNSAM, at, you know, the people on the ground, the organizations? What would be really helpful for you or other organizations like yours?
Well, I think that maybe I could summarize it with just match the resources to the rhetoric, not just financial contributions, but also technical support. I've been in so many forums where we talk about the realities, the challenges, the context, but for that to actually lead to support and programming and partnership to actually implement some of these ideas that are based on real contextual knowledge and real need, it's very challenging. And I think that this is the direction that many people are going towards. We like I mentioned, we had to seek support from academic institutions halfway across the world just to build our own capacity, to support us with developing these adaptation checklists for understanding our own community. And when we've invested in that, we've come up with ideas on how we can actually mitigate some of the challenges we're finding in our communities. But it's difficult for it to move beyond conversation to theory to actual practice. And what we're facing in Somalia is an imminent threat. It's not only a prospective future challenge. We're seeing the realities of climate change and environmental degradation today. It's becoming increasingly harder for us to do our work, whether it's in the peace building, whether it's in development, whether it's in state formation. All of these elements are interlinked. And now more than ever, we have opportunity, we have momentum to actually lead with solutions. And I think that we need to just start and mobilize. And I think that we are well positioned in Somalia, just from the conversation we've had today, whether it's from the EU support, whether it's from the UN, to actually do more and lead, whether it's also in community research as well. I'm part of an initiative with CIPRI on the environment for peace, where we're also challenging the global consciousness and narrative around the environment for peace and climate and security. I think that the biggest challenge we face in Somalia as well is that we are faced by these challenges throughout. Everyone is affected, but they don't label it as climate change. We only see the last manifestation into armed conflict. And I think it's very important that we invest in climate change education with an interdisciplinary approach, like Chris mentioned as well too, on the indigenous and local knowledge of communities, but then also fast tracking and integrating modern science and technologies, organic agriculture education and information dissemination. We have women that are putting their lives at the forefront of peace and security issues. Can we support them and also mobilizing them as climate change and peace building ambassadors? Right now, the political situation in Somalia is calling for a rehaul, and not just the electoral process, but the future as we see it. And we need to also integrate environmental conversations in that process. And I think that we're not facing a situation where civil society is not informed or interested or willing to participate and be amiable in their programming as they have done them, but there's a lack of inclusion. And I think that this conversation is one that creates entry points for many people to engage in a space that they have not been a part of before.
Thank you. Another question that was also raised by one of our participants is by Christian Pietz, and Chris, you've responded to it. You began to respond to it. I would say. I just want to maybe frame the question. You've indicated that it's the climate change has exacerbated conflict in Somalia, maybe leading to more localized conflicts because of competition over resources. And it's also led then to demographic changes, right, in certain parts of Somalia. And that change has also become an opportunity, if you like, for the UN and other actors to use climate security or environmental mediation, as you say, as entry points. How do all these come together? Sort of the intersection between climate security with gender and youth, and sort of this environmental mediation pilot project that the mission is embarking on. How is this being played out, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated, and I think that trying to understand all the dynamics is key, and spending time to really work on that. So what we're trialing is something where we can bring community dialogue approaches. We're looking at we're looking at, like, how can we then bring data on environment to look at mapping out some of the issues around the conflict, specifically around grazing lands and water. And this is where the sort of what Ilwa was saying, the science and the satellite imagery that can help on mapping and working it, but bringing that together with these community dialogues. And then the idea is that we try to then bring in the peace mediation approach, but along these lines of climate change and climate conflict, and then trying to bring in some of the nature-based solutions and a lot of the work around indigenous knowledge, as well as bringing the voice of women and youth together. So it's incredibly complicated to try to bring them all together in this sort of multifaceted approach, but actually we think that that's the only way to do it, and to do it at a really adaptive, flexible approach, because as Christian said, it can be taken in terms of elite capture and used as a political tool as well. So the tricky thing is to balance this out. At how do you really bring a focus on local indigenous knowledge, and at the same time bring in the political actors, but try not to do it too much that it becomes a political elite capture moment. And so that's where it's a really quite fine balancing aspect. But I think that there's a really good opportunity there, and what we're already sort of thinking is partnering civil society with UN, who can broker some of the sort of peace side, and then community organizations, NGOs, to help deliver things like water and water wells that might need to be doing, but then bringing in things like ecosystem thinking, rather than just digging a well, thinking around the whole ecosystems approach, so that we know what will happen with climate change. We'll know how those underground aquifers can refill. How can we think around the grazing lands, the tree, the grass, and the shade, so that then the grazing lands are there. So integrating nature-based solutions as part of that.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I think I would like to just finally pick on something that I think Sharon and I have been working on for quite some time. And actually, we first met 15 years ago, and that's local ownership. And this is exactly also what Ilvat and you, Chris, were referring to, that we really be more inclusive, that actually there is local knowledge. There are also local solutions. It's not only about what the international community and the operations can bring to the table, but it's much more also what we can learn from organizations and individuals like Ilvat and her organization to actually be able in a true and balanced and equal partnership to come to solutions. And I really hope, and I think that you know, climate and environmental security, that is an issue area where maybe and hopefully, you know, local ownership to, you know, in a true sense can be brought equally to the table. So let me at this point just thank you all for your contributions. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that, and I hope we can continue that kind of discussion in a different format. Hopefully, not only a virtual format, but eventually also in a format where we all, and also some of the participants who stuck with us all through the 1 hour of our session, can actually join together, whether it's in Berlin or somewhere else, and discuss that. So thank you very much. And with that, I hand over to my colleague Lukas Rüttinger from Adelphi, who now has the great opportunity to actually pick some key takeaways from this very rich discussion. And well, Lukas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tobias. And yeah, thank you to all the panelists. This was really excellent conversation. I'm just struck and really happy to see that these conversations are now finally happening. It's kind of like this, we have very, very different perspectives on the panel, but like what struck me is that you're all practitioners. And I think that makes it different to conversations that I've had over the past 10 years, where for a long time, there was like a lot of academics, a lot of think tanks, a lot of universities talking about climate security. And finally, we're at the point now that actually practitioners are talking. And I know we started out with the risks, but I'm really happy that the conversation moved on quite quickly, not just talking about the risks and what we need to do, but finally starting to exchange some experiences and what people are actually doing on the ground. And I think like what always strikes me also about these conversations, especially that Somalia is really a forerunner in the world here. Like there's so much happening on climate security in Somalia, and the world should really look towards Somalia and what's happening there very, very closely and learn from that, because I think it's really, really encouraging. And yeah, I'm not going to try to summarize, but maybe just pick a couple of points that I thought were super interesting and it stuck with me. I think the kind of like the discussion around like relationships and partnerships and the strengths that different partners can bring to the table, kind of like the government that needs to be brought in, but of course that's a complicated relationship, so that really needs to be managed in a certain way. The role that maybe the organizations like the UN, the AU, and the EU can play in facilitating that relationship between government, civil society, and local communities. I also, of course, was happy to hear kind of the collaboration with universities and think tanks, that is something that can really help. I think on the one side, of course, to provide maybe some input, some capacity building, but also maybe more importantly, I mean, that at least from my perspective, working at Adelphi is like that we partner with local organizations to really learn from their contextual knowledge, and that is really key for any intervention in the climate security sphere, is that if you don't have a local partner, don't even start working on this. Like you really need that contextual knowledge. You need the solutions from the ground, and without that, it is not possible. And then I also, of course, was very happy to hear that we don't, or think it's important, you know, what you said, that we don't need another silo. We need more cooperation, and that's kind of course, more information exchange of experiences, but also broadening it beyond climate, environment, to include issues like gender and broader social inclusion. And of course, and that was also underlined in the conversation, that it's important or that there's a danger it becomes too broad, and then we put everything in there. But I think that also the panelists were very clear of like what the solution is to that, and that just be specific. You have to be specific what challenge you are actually talking about, which problem, which conflict, and which specific activity. Is it strengthening capacities to manage local conflicts over natural resources? Is it sustainable livelihoods in reintegration programs? Or is it strengthening state capacity to address environmental crime? All of those play an important role. But I think if we break it down to that practical level, then I think people understand how these different issues come together and how solutions can look like. And that's super important. And then that it's really not a technical problem. And I think that is, again, came up in this conversation. It has a political side. It needs community engagement. Chris was talking about a solar project. I think everybody who's worked on natural resource management conflicts knows that it's really key to not ignore the political side, but to engage with it. And I think that's also where peace building practitioners, especially local people, have a lot of experience, how to engage with the community, how to navigate a complicated political economy around that. And for those activities to really have a peace building impact, you cannot ignore questions like equity and inclusiveness. It just has to be at the center of it. Yeah, and with that, I'd like to thank everyone for this like really enriching discussion. I had a wonderful time, and back over to you, Tobias.
Thank you very much, Lucas, and again, thanks Ilva, thanks Chris, thanks Conchi for your contributions. I really enjoyed that. I learned a lot. Sharon and I, we will stay engaged. Actually, the Challenges Forum this year will be on climate and environmental security in peace operations, and CIF is proud to co-host that actually in Berlin. And you will hear from us. There will be something probably also accessible virtually or openly, and we hope that we will contribute and widen the discussion on peace operations and climate and environmental security. All the best to all of you. Thank you very much also for your attention to the participants out there. And I would actually like to stop with the one practical example, which I thought is quite nice because it's a nice symbol. Because I read, Chris, that actually there is a tree nursery that UNSOM is doing. And actually that UNSOM and AMISOM, are planting the trees, are actually taking, the trees wherever they go in Somalia. And hopefully they will also be planted by other Somali partners and civil society organizations. And I hope that we planted some more trees now also for peacekeeping partnerships, for partnerships between local and international actors. And with that, again, let me thank all of you and have a good afternoon, and see you hopefully again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.